My plan was to conclude by thanking everyone, but I think today I'm going to start by thanking everyone because part of me was thinking there was going to be like 5 or 10 people in the audience due to the temperatures. But then I also remembered that as citizens of Duluth, you have a reputation to maintain. So when I go back to St. Paul, I know it wouldn't do you guys right if I said, no one showed up, it was too cold. Am I going to have to hold this? All right, so when I started thinking about this presentation, I thought, what am I going to say to everyone about Jehovah's Witnesses? Because if I say they don't have it right, you're all just going to say, yeah, we know. Or if I say I was one and now I'm not, you're going to say that's obvious. If I say I have issues with them, you're going to be like, well, that's obvious, you wrote a book about it. So I thought maybe I can get everybody excited about Jehovah's Witnesses or about my story leaving if we do a little bit of like a game show. But then my problem became, what type of game show are we going to do, right? So first I thought we could do like Family Feud. I'll put the top 4 answers on the board, and you guys try and come up with the answers. But I realized that that wouldn't work. So then I thought, well, we could do like Wheel of Fortune, and you guys can shout out letters, and I'll slowly reveal the answer, right? But then I figured that that would not work either. Then I came up with this idea where we could do like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where I'll ask a question, I'll have A, B, C, and D, and you guys guess which one you think is right. I think that's what works, so that's what we'll do, okay? So I'm going to ask you some questions about Jehovah's Witnesses of varying difficulty, and you can just shout out what letter you think the right answer is and see how well you do, and hopefully that'll intrigue you to listen to the rest of the presentation, okay? We'll start off kind of easy. First is, how do Jehovah's Witnesses define Jesus? Is he God Almighty? Is he God's Son? Is he part of the Trinity? Or is he just an important prophet? Good, we have the whole spectrum here. That's good, because if y'all got it right, I could just end right now, I suppose, but it's God's Son. Where do most Jehovah's Witnesses believe they will go immediately upon death? Heaven, purgatory, hell, or kolob? I'll explain this in a little bit, but they do, most of them think that immediately upon death, they're going to hell. Yeah, because of global warming, yes. According to the witnesses, how long have humans been on the earth? They've been here for 144,000 years, 10,000 years, just over 6,000 years, or just over 4,000? You're right. As of October, it's been 6,037 years that we humans have been here. In like manner, how long has the planet been here? Just as long as humans? A year longer than humans? 10,000 years? Or who knows, just a really long time? Yeah, they actually are fine with pretty much whatever scientists say on the matter. If scientists say the Earth is 1 million years old, they're fine. If they say it's 1 trillion years old, they're fine. Whatever the recent finding is, witnesses are fine with the age of the planet of the Earth. Here's the last one. This is the trickiest one too. What's a good witness most likely to do upon graduating from high school? Now, of course, different witnesses do all these things, but what are they most expected to, or what's the drive to do, okay? Should they not go to college and not have kids? Should they marry young, like right out of high school, but not have any kids? Marry young and have lots of kids. Should they marry young and have no kids, or should they just get to college? So give yourself half credit, though, if you picked C, because remember the scripture that says, if you can't control yourself, it's better to marry than be inflamed with passion. But what they want you to do is A. Okay, so hopefully that whets your appetite a little bit. Here's what we'll talk about today, okay? I want to talk about the big difference between Jehovah's Witnesses and other major religions. I'll give you 4 identifying traits of Jehovah's Witnesses. I'll tell you what it was like being a witness child, using my sample set of 1, but hopefully it applies to others. I'll talk about the motivating factor in remaining a witness, methods for leaving the religion. I might mention that an outspoken apostate of Jehovah's Witnesses just wrote a book. And then we'll do questions and answers at the end, so hopefully you can hold your questions till the end. I think that would work out better for me, if that's all right. I'll just wrestle with the microphone a little more. Okay. So, but before I discuss the biggest way witnesses are different, let's talk about like just basically their beliefs so that we're all on the same page here. I'll tell you like everything you want to know about Jehovah's Witnesses, but we're afraid to ask because you knew they'd just come back again next Saturday, right? So first, they're Bible literalists. If the Bible says a flood covered the whole earth, then it covered the whole earth. If the Bible says that Moses parted the Red Sea, he parted the Red Sea. It wasn't just a dry season. He really parted the Red Sea. Unless, like I said, it's so ridiculous that they couldn't possibly expect anyone to buy it, so that, like I mentioned before, they are old earth creationists. They self-identify as Christians. If you go online, you can find all sorts of discussions about whether or not this sect or that sect is Christians. So just for the sake of argument, Jehovah's Witnesses do identify as Christians. In fact, they would tell you that they are the Christian religion, the only one. In fact, they call their religion the truth. That's a term that we used maybe when I was meeting another witness. I might say, oh, how long have you been in the truth? Or I might say, did you grow up in the truth or did you join later? So they use that term. They distinguish themselves from all other religions that we would call Christian by calling them Christendom. So everything from Catholics to Mormons, Orthodox Church, that's all Christendom. That's how they refer to them. So they think that very soon, and I'll get to more of this later, very soon the earth will be transformed into a whole paradise, a beautiful place, no pollution, no sickness, no death, no problems. And that's going to be a paradise. They think that heaven is where God and Jesus live, and they do think that a few number of the witnesses, when they die, will go to heaven to be rulers over the earth. But a very small number. Less than 1% of Jehovah's Witnesses think that they're going to go to heaven, but they think that millions of witnesses plus billions of people who get resurrected will live here forever on earth. And I kind of had a trick question earlier with hell because they teach that hell is just a synonym of the Greek word Gehenna or the Hebrew word Sheol, just the common grave. So they don't think that they're going to go burn where some guy with a pitchfork is poking them night and day for eternity. They just think they're going to be non-existent. I know it's a scary thought. So they do think that we're living in the last days, that the last days began in 1914, which is 100 years ago now. And they think that God will bring about a war called Armageddon any day now, very soon. Deliverance is right at hand, right? And after Armageddon is when we'll have the paradise. They're also works-driven. You can pray all the time, be the most devout believer in Jehovah. You can self-identify as a Jehovah's Witness, but they will not count you among your members if you just sit on your couch all day. You have to report the time that you spend proselytizing, and you also have to show up at their meetings and do lots of other things, which we'll get into in a little bit here. They're also politically neutral, by the way. They don't hold political office. They don't vote. They don't serve in the military. They won't even accept a job that could be perceived as taking sides politically, like they won't be a speechwriter for a senator, for example. Most of them would actually be pretty hard-pressed to even tell you the political party that, for example, our senators belong to or our representative. So, you know, some people, and I hear this among freethinkers a lot, they'll say, well, it's tough to get out of all religion, or there's information control in all religions. And to an extent, I agree that that's true. But there's huge differences here, so I hope that I can explain that. Let me compare being and leaving a Jehovah's Witness with being and leaving a Catholicism. I've never been a Catholic, but I do have extended family members that are, many coworkers, right? So here's the deal. If you're a Catholic, you're free to vote or not vote. In fact, I've known Catholics who have voted for Republicans. I've known Catholics who have voted for Democratic candidates. I've known Catholics who have voted for people who are not in the back pockets of big corporations. And though the church might take an official stance on certain issues, you're free to deviate from that, right? I know Catholics who make no secret about the fact that they practice birth control. In fact, in the Twin Cities last summer, here's Catholics marching for gay rights. Now these bizarre Catholics, we could call them, they're not excommunicated from the church. They're not brought into a secret room and made to confess their sins and then reproved or disciplined in some way. They're free to still hang out with other Catholics and associate with them. In fact, look, they're not being shy about their odd belief at all, are they? So again, I mean, if you were Catholic and you're not, that's great. And I know that there's differences, so you don't have to come up to me later and say, well, I was a Catholic and it was super strict. Yeah, I'm sure that for some people it was. I'm just trying to say that there's differences in the thought control and the time demands on every religion. So I hope that that kind of speaks to the difference between a large religion like Catholics and cults like Jehovah's Witnesses. So let's talk about 4 unique traits of Jehovah's Witnesses. First one is information control. If you want some good examples of this, I, again, have a book that you can read. But suffice it to say, everything is filtered from the Watchtower Society. So when I was a Jehovah's Witness, when I was a kid, we had a TV. We even subscribed to National Geographic. The paper showed up on our doorstep every Sunday. So we did get information from outside sources. But we had to be really careful because that all came from Satan's world. We had to make sure there was nothing that contradicted the Watchtower Society or nothing that could subvert our faith. In fact, when I was in high school, I worked at the public library, and if I would see a book from a former Jehovah's Witness, even just seeing it would make me nervous that it was even in existence and that the librarians dared to order it. I would take the book off the shelf and hide it in the back if I could. Or if I couldn't do that, I would take it off the shelf and turn it around so that the spine was backwards. So yeah, I didn't last very long there, I guess. But if you want to hear it straight from the source, here are a couple of quotes. I can't see them too well, but so in 2001 they said, and the Watchtower magazine, in case you don't know, is their flagship periodical, and the governing organization of the Jehovah's Witnesses is called the Watchtower Society. So here's what they said in 2001. A Jehovah's Witness does not advocate or insist on personal opinions or harbor private ideas when it comes to Bible understanding. Rather, he has complete confidence in the truth and as it is revealed by Jehovah God through his Son Jesus Christ and the faithful and discreet slave. And then just a few years ago, they said, the Watchtower Society does not endorse any literature, meetings, or websites that are not produced or organized under its oversight. For those that wish to do extra Bible study and research, we recommend that they explore Insight on the Scriptures, which is the Watchtower Society's produced encyclopedia. So they're not endorsing this meeting, in case anybody was under any false assumptions. And here's why they're really insistent on information control, because they have all these beliefs and teachings, and a lot of them are really easy to poke holes into. Here, I'll give you an example. One thing that Jehovah's Witnesses will tell you that is proof that they're the one true religion is that during the last recent decades, they've experienced phenomenal growth. And they say there's no way you can explain that. That can't possibly be due to human efforts. That can only be because of divine approval. God is making our religion exponentially explode in size, right? So I hope this graph makes sense to you. I made it myself. So the Jehovah's Witnesses are the green line. We have Latter-day Saints on the blue line and Seventh-day Adventists on the red line. All the way down at the left side there, in 1950, they all had around 1 million members. And look at how the witnesses have grown. They're up to 7 million members now. But if we're going to judge which religion is right by which one has exploded in growth, then we should be Mormons or Seventh-day Adventists, right? And I'm just looking at 3 very similar religions here. I'm not even looking at, say, Islam or Catholicism, other larger religions. So as you can see, just doing a little bit of research on the internet just to see the numbers shows that you can already poke holes in some of their basic beliefs and evidences that they provide. So the next thing I will mention is that witnesses have a very unique jargon, and that makes it really difficult to write a book about my experiences as a witness and to even talk to you guys about it, because I feel like I have to keep defining them. Here's what I mean. In other religions, other Christian religions, you might hear people say something like, in church today, my pastor gave a sermon about hellfire. Or you might hear something like, after services, our youth group is leaving for a mission. Now, if you've never been religious or if you've never been Christian, I think you still kind of know what these mean, right? I mean, these aren't terms that I used as a Jehovah's Witness, but I know what they mean. I mean, you can kind of figure out, like, let's say your coworker tells you this tomorrow at work, right? You can kind of figure out what they mean. But here's something that Jehovah's Witnesses might say, and I promise this is honest to science. This is what a witness might say. On the way home from service, the other ministerial servant and I took a return visit to keep our time going, since we're both auxiliary pioneering this month. So I was planning on defining all these terms, but I thought that'll be really boring. So just suffice it to say that this totally makes sense if you're a Jehovah's Witness. In fact, I know that there's some former witnesses in the audience. Maybe you can tell us what gender would the person be who would have said something like this? Yeah, only a man would have said this. How about this? Last week, I had a number 3 talk in the ministry school from the Bible Teach book, and this week I'm a householder. Again, makes perfect sense to a Jehovah's Witness. Is this something a man or a woman would say? Yep. I'd love to serve where the need is greater, like the Kingdom Ministry suggests, but my unbelieving mate is opposed, and I need to remain in submission so as to win without a word. Makes perfect sense if you're a witness. Would a man or a woman say that? Right, yeah. The word subjection really gives it away there, right? Here's one more. At the elders meeting, the PO said we want our children to stay in the truth. So we shouldn't allow them to associate with worldly kids, or even weak ones in our congregation who might be bad association. Is that something a man or a woman would say? Yeah, only a man would say that because only a man would be at an elders meeting with the PO. So if that makes no sense to you, then my point is made. So here's the next trait, and I kind of touched on this earlier, but there's extreme conformity. Like I noted earlier, there's no room for personal interpretation. There were no witness splinter groups. There were no witnesses marching in gay rights parades. There was not some congregation in rural Montana that had women elders. There weren't some people in the congregation that pretty much did everything the witnesses said, but just didn't think we needed to go door to door. There's none of that. In fact, all of our churches, which we called Kingdom Halls, looked the same. They all had the same schedules with the same materials, the same organizational structures. All of our Bible and literature came from the Watchtower Society, and every Jehovah's Witnesses congregation had the same meetings every week worldwide, studying from the same Watchtower magazines. In fact, we had a song that we sang to brag about it. Song number 213, here's how the song opened, and I'm not going to sing it to you, but we said, "We must act together as one, independence wisely we shun, harmony and oneness of mind bring peace of rarest kind." And here's a funny thing about witnesses. When the Watchtower Society changes their teaching, changes their view on something, so do you immediately. So that's kind of a fun way that you could mess with witnesses. If they come to your door, you can ask them what they believe about something. They won't tell you. Like if you say, "How do you feel the president is doing?" They won't tell you because they don't have an opinion about it. Or if they do, they're keeping it a secret because witnesses are politically neutral, right? Or if you say, "How do you personally feel about going door to door? Do you think it's effective? Do you enjoy it?" They'll just toe the line and tell you exactly what they're supposed to say. They'll say, "Oh, look, we're supposed to enjoy it. Look, it's a fun thing according to this literature." In fact, if you really want to mess with them, I mean, it's better to just not get into a conversation with them when they come to your door. But if you want to just have fun with them, ask them this: will those who are killed in Sodom be resurrected in paradise? And for those who don't know, in the Bible book of Genesis chapter 19, God destroys the city of Sodom with fire and brimstone. Only 3 people survive. Everyone else, including women, young people, infants, they're all murdered by God, right? So when God brings that paradise I talked about, is he going to resurrect them? Obviously some of them were evil, right? But is he going to resurrect the 1-year-old babies that he killed? Well, the Watchtower Society in 1920, they said, yes, he will. So that's easy enough, right? If you were in the 1920s or 30s and you asked a witness, will some people from Sodom be resurrected? They'd say, oh yeah, we teach it. But the Watchtower Society couldn't seem to come to an agreement on it. In the 50s, they said no. In the 60s, they said yes. Later in the 60s, they said no. In the 70s, they said yes. In 1988, they said no, and then just a couple months later, they said, well, some of them will. And in this century, they're sticking with no. So my prediction, judging from the timeline, is it's going to be yes any day now. Sometime between now and 10 years from now, they're going back to yes. So yeah, if a witness comes to your door next week and you ask them this, they might know. They might say, oh no, witnesses aren't, people from Sodom are not going to be resurrected. But they might be real befuddled, especially if they're an older person who's lived through several of these changes. They might be like, oh, I have to do research on that and get back to you and see what our religion teaches. And if you say, no, what do you think? What do you think? Do you think people from Sodom? How does that feel in your conscience? They won't answer that because they don't want to accidentally be different from what the official doctrine is. You know, a funny thing is that sometime after I left the witnesses, my mom argued that one of the traits, like the population growth that I showed, the membership growth, I mean, one of the traits that we can use to see that the witnesses are true is their conformity and how they all toe the line. You know, we're unified as an organization. And I had to laugh at her because, of course, they're unified, because as soon as you have any dissension, you're brought into a room and taught to or encouraged to change your mind. If you don't change your mind, you're kicked out, which I'll get into more later, right? So that's why I said there's no witnesses that are marching in a gay pride parade. If they do, then they're going to be hauled into a meeting tomorrow. They're going to be made to repent. If they don't do that, they're kicked out. So then we're not going, they either recant or we won't have anything to do with them anymore, right? So of course the unanimity remains. This picture actually really defines it if you're more of a visual person. This is a painting that's at their world headquarters. I snapped this picture when I was on tour there. So you see the witnesses going door to door here in Duluth, bringing the literature to all you fine people. They get it from their congregation, right? And it gets disseminated from the printing presses that are in Brooklyn, New York, which evidently come straight out of some giant hands in the sky. So what the Watchtower Society teaches, they don't say it explicitly word for word that their magazines are divinely inspired, but there's a real heavy suggestion here, isn't there? So the final unique trait I wanted to touch on is their demands on time. And I'll read an abridged excerpt from my book, and this is the most boring page of my book. Sunday started the week with a 2-hour meeting. After the meeting, we joined our brothers and sisters out in service, which was our term for going door to door. On Monday, my dad read the daily text during dinner, and since there was a meeting on Tuesday, we set aside time to study for that meeting. On Tuesday, we attended a 1-hour book study. Wednesday night was ostensibly for our family study. Every family head was encouraged to conduct a study with their family. My dad maintained no consistency in this regard, but he tried. On Thursday night, we attended another 2-hour meeting. Sometimes my dad or mom had a talk, so sometime in the days before, they had to set aside time to prepare. I began giving talks, and later when I began giving talks, my mom spent hours helping me prepare. On Friday, my dad and I sat on my bedroom floor and we studied the Bible. Saturday was service day. We always went out in service on Saturday, there was no question. And most nights, my dad turned on the cassette player and my sister and I fell asleep listening to a recording of the Watchtower Society's children's book. So I want to stress that this is just the bare minimum. This is what we did this is what every Jehovah's Witness does, at least. In fact, if you're not going door to door and attending the meetings, then like I mentioned earlier, they don't even consider you a Jehovah's Witness, even if you call yourself a Jehovah's Witness and associate with them. What I read to you just now is what I did as a child, but I'll touch on a little bit later. As an adult, I obviously had to have more demands on my time. In fact, here's the time slip in case you're wondering that witnesses turn in every month to report the proselytizing that they do. So if they come to your door and you take the literature, that's great because it helps them add to their totals down at the bottom. And if they say, can we come back next week, and you let them, then they get to count you as a return visit, which is great. So that's really nice of you to do that for them. In fact, if you don't turn this in, you can expect a call from the elders, as I found out. I was a good boy and turned in my time every month as a Jehovah's Witness, sometimes even in the last couple years even lying about it just so that they would stay off my back. But they called, why? Because my honest wife was being a wicked Jezebel woman and not turning in time anymore, and they wanted to know what the deal was. So yeah, you can't really get away with slacking for even a little bit. And here, just to show you that I'm not being excessive, I have a visual. This is from the December 15th, 2009 Watchtower magazine, and the caption reads, it says, "You may need to adjust how you apportion your time if you are to remain joyful." Yeah, I mean, no kidding. I'm going to assume that this is a week, right? Because people don't go to the meetings every day. Most people don't go to work every day. And there's no time for sleeping, so this is probably just waking hours, right? But still, look, they're showing like 1/6 of your time for going to their meetings at their churches, 1/6 of your time studying their literature, another 1/6 of your time going door to door, and they're leaving like only 1/6 of your waking hours for work. That equates to like 19 hours a week. And thankfully, they give you 19 hours a week to care for your home and your family, so hopefully you have no spouse or children and you just rent an apartment, because you're not going to have time to care for a house and a yard and children or anything if you got anything like that. So all this control over information really has an effect on an individual, which is what I wanted to talk about next, especially on individuals who are children. Just think about the start of the school year. Every year, here's what happened with my sister and I. My parents would go to the open house the week before, and they would bring this brochure titled School and Jehovah's Witnesses, and they would go to our new classrooms and they would give one of these 32-page brochures to the teachers. This brochure would helpfully point out to the teacher why I wouldn't be participating in the flag salute, singing the national anthem, mock elections, school or class elections, or Halloween, All Saints Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's Day, President's Day, Easter, May Day, or even Mother's Day. It also talked about why I wouldn't be doing any after-school sports, cheerleading, homecoming, wrestling, school dances, school plays, school clubs, blood drives, lotteries, class prayers, other kids' birthdays, or even my own birthday celebration. The brochure also explained what my parents, as Jehovah's Witnesses, expected from the teacher regarding sex education, science education, art, and music. Here's a funny thing the brochure helpfully notes: "You will find that our young people do not feel deprived because of the Bible's moral restrictions. On the contrary, one witness youth, in comparing his life with that of his schoolmates, said, "The only thing I've missed out on is a lot of trouble." So now think about if you're a young kid, anywhere from, 5 to 18, and you're walking into your first day of class. I was pretty outgoing and pretty forthright about my beliefs, but even I wanted to segue into the school year a little bit, especially when it was a new school, like when I started junior high. But you can only keep your beliefs quiet for like 1 minute, because here, if I go back and you see all these things, what happens right away, especially in elementary school? The flag salute, right? So you don't stick out for like 1 minute, and then the teacher says it's time to salute the flag, and immediately you really stand out. And every teacher handled this differently. I remember in first grade, the teacher had me walk out and sit in the hallway, which was silly because the flag salute is like, 45 seconds? So think about how long it would take me to like walk out those doors, sit down, and then come back in and sit down. It's like, that's how long it takes you to say it. So I would go out there quietly, kind of embarrassed. I'd nod at the other witnesses I saw in the hallway in their classrooms. And then, in lunchtime, everyone's asking, why did you do that? Can we do that too? Is that legal, We want to be bad too, And then in, was it 3rd or 4th grade, I remember the teacher said, well, just sit there, But then you still really stick out, because why is James sitting there? Is he going to get in trouble? Normally he seems like a good kid. Oh, well. And this is how life progressed for my sister and I as a child. We attended the 3 meetings a week with our family, including one on Tuesday evening and on Thursday evening. And this made it tough to get enough sleep for school or to have time to get our homework done. And then I also knew that I was never going to be friends with these classmates. I mean, I was friendly to them, right, because I want them to have a good impression of my religion. But I never counted anyone that I knew in all my school career as a friend. I never went to their house. I never went to any of their birthday parties. They never came to my home. I never stayed in touch with any of them after school. I never even bothered to get a high school yearbook, because what memories are we remembering here, right? And then here's another thing. When you go door to door every Saturday, eventually the door's going to open and there's going to be one of your classmates, right? And that's really awkward, even for someone who was really zealous and outgoing like me. I'd be there and I'd knock on the door and there's an adult with his 10-year-old son or daughter snickering behind me. And then on Monday they want to know, is that what you do every weekend? You wear that stupid tie? I hate wearing ties. I'd never do that. And then as I got older, of course, there were different pressures. We didn't salute the flag in high school. I don't know about all of you, but instead those demands were replaced with prom and dating, and these are things that witnesses are not allowed to do socially. In fact, you're not supposed to date at all unless you have a chaperone at all times, which is really difficult in some cases. And your date also has to be a witness, and you intend to marry that person. So, in effect, asking someone out on a date is like asking them to marry you. In fact, my wife and I, before she was my wife, we thought our official engagement was kind of a silly and meaningless milestone, because we'd already been dating, so everyone already knew that we were going to get married. So what was the big deal about it? Now, of course, not all witnesses, like I said, were quite as diligent as I was. Some would, and I saw this sometime in my classroom, sometimes they would sneakily grab a piece of cake during a birthday celebration. Or in music class, when we were singing a Christmas song, they would mouth the words because they didn't want to get called out, right? Or in one case, as I mentioned in my book, during a talent show, one of the girls from my congregation lip-synced to a Michael Jackson song, and of course, as an ex-witness, he's completely off limits. So as a good witness, I would be sure to tattle on them, because, that's the right thing to do. I know it actually wasn't because I was a tattletale. It was because I was sincerely worried about them. And here, what do we want to talk about here? The motivating factor in remaining a witness. Here's why I would tell on my fellow witnesses, is because the motivating factor is fear. So I was sincerely worried about them. If a fellow witness grabs a piece of birthday cake, they could die in Armageddon because they did something against what God said. So I want their parents and their elders to know about it so that they come back into the fold, so they come back in line with our doctrine, right? And I think that it's really a fear-based cult when you look at it that way. And there's different fears popping up throughout your life. Since I'm talking about being a child, let's consider that some more. Think about being a child. You're in constant fear of who's being good or bad, even your own fellow witness students, right? Because we're taught that pretty much only witnesses are going to survive Armageddon. Everyone else is going to be killed. So it's really strange because I went to school with these non-witnesses, and again, I wasn't their friend, but a lot of them seemed like pretty good people. I mean, they weren't worshiping God, right? But most of them didn't seem like complete jerks that should be killed, especially in elementary school. They're all innocent kids, right? And then think about your family too. I mean, for me, I guess that was easy because my uncles and aunts, cousins, my grandparents, my parents, we were all Jehovah's Witnesses. So to me, this was easy. My family, we're all good people. We're all going to make it through Armageddon. But to use my wife as an example, her parents joined the religion when they were young adults. So my wife's extended family, they were not witnesses. So that was strange for her as a little girl because she'd go stay at her grandparents' house, and they seemed like really good people. They even claimed to worship God. They were devout churchgoers, yet she knows in the back of her mind that her God, the one that she prays to and loves and that she's supposed to consider her best friend, is going to murder her grandparents any day now, because remember, we're living in the last days, and it could come really soon. And then think about the fear as a young adult. So I'm afraid of going to college, right? I mean, at best, it's just Satan's way of distracting me from what I really need to be spending my time on, and that's the religion. But at worst, it's a place where I'll be exposed to faith-threatening ideas like philosophy or evolution. And of course, at every college campus, there's just nonstop drug abuse and casual sex, right? And how can I make all those meetings and find time to go door to door if I'm busy with homework and classes, especially because in college, classes are at all different times of the day, so what if they conflict with the meetings? And yeah, it's true that college might help me to get a better career or at least be more employable, but I don't want a career, right? Because the world is ending any day now, and I know I've touched on that a few times, but I want to point out that the Watchtower Society really does teach that the end is coming soon. Here's some things that they said. Here's what they said in 1966. Yes, the present system of things is soon coming to its end. In 69, they said, if you are a young person, you also need to face the fact that you will never grow old in this present system of things. So just think if you were born in, say, 1950, right? You'd be a young person here. You'd be like 19 years old. Well, now you're in your 60s, so you're not going to grow old, but you're getting there. In 1971, they said, Jehovah God will soon bring a speedy end to all wickedness in his war of Armageddon. In 1989, for all its presumed benefits, would 4 years or more in a university be the best use of the remaining time? And see, if you started college in 89 and did it in 4 years, you already would have been graduated for 20 years now. So there's 20 years you would have lost on a better job or a more fulfilling occupation if you heeded this counsel. In 97, they said, the increasingly difficult conditions on earth are striking evidence that a vast change, indeed a grand deliverance, is near at hand. In 99, they said, and very soon, Jehovah will end poverty and oppression, in fact, all suffering. And here's a visual. This is a Watchtower magazine cover from 1984, in case you can't read it. It says 1914. Remember I said that's the year that they said that the last days began? They said that is the generation that will not pass away. For years, they promised that the people who saw 1914, who were aware of it, so I don't mean some baby born on December 31st, 1914. I mean someone who was born in, say, 1900 and would at least have been old enough to understand what was going on in 1914. They said those people will not pass away. So in 1984, of course, look at these people who were born in 1900. They're all old people. That shows that the end is coming really soon. I don't mean any disrespect to any of these people, but they actually have all passed away. These are all loyal Jehovah's Witnesses. You can find out their names on the internet, and I think the last one lived and passed away in 2007. So for several years now, these people are all history. So I think this explains why witnesses take such satisfaction in their religion too, because they didn't get good careers, right? So they don't find any fulfillment at their jobs. They didn't make good friends in school, so it's not like they have those strong of relationships. And I think this also explains why some elders in the congregation weren't the humble shepherds that they were supposed to be, because they labored all day in dead-end jobs. So many witnesses are retail clerks, window washers, or janitors. This is what they did all day. But then in the evening, they got to put on their spiffy suit. They got to go into the Kingdom Hall where they were the leaders in the congregation. They got to counsel people. They got to give talks. They could assign various privileges, which we'll talk about what privileges are in a little bit. But so in most congregations, this produced a couple of rotten apples when it comes to the elders, as you can see in my book. Now consider finally the fear as a parent. And I can boil down the fear of that in the religion to one question. Oh, I skipped something here. Oh, I know what I wanted to mention, that if you want to be an elder, by the way, you have to have the right qualities. And by right qualities, I mean that you have to have a drive to work for God whole-souled, you have to be obedient to the Watchtower Society, and you have to have a penis. So, I don't have any visuals for you on this one. So this is why there's such a drive, especially among the men, to do good in the religion, because again, there's no satisfaction outside the religion, in school or work. It's all just in the congregation. Okay, here's the fear that you have as a parent. I can boil it down to this single question. Is my child going to survive Armageddon? And this question gnawed at my wife and I from the moment that we knew that she was pregnant with our first child, because we know that not everyone's going to survive Armageddon. In fact, some witnesses would say that you are even putting God to the test by having children, because you're asking God to keep alive this person who's not really devoting their life to him, or who might not devote their life to him. So sure, as a baby, our son is just a pure, innocent, sweet little boy, right? And you might think, who could possibly want to harm a child? Well, this guy would, for one thing. In fact, here's a picture from the Watchtower Society's book for children. This is the story of Noah and the Great Flood. It depicts when Noah and his sons and 4 women who don't even deserve to be named, evidently, they all boarded a shoebox with 10 million pairs of animals and every disease, evidently, that humans could possibly have, because that's how we still have them today. And then meanwhile, everyone outside the ark was murdered by a God that the Apostle John describes as love. And look right there, there's a baby. And it's just moments away from being murdered. What did it do wrong? What grievous sin did it commit that an all-loving deity couldn't find it in its heart to at least put it in the ark, or just somehow magically let it live? And this is the book for children, by the way. Well, I'll tell you what the baby did wrong. It had the bad sense to be born to that woman, for one thing. Because here's the correlation. See, my wife and I, and many witnesses, can kind of reason that their child will be safe at Armageddon because it was born to devout Jehovah's Witnesses. But the problem is that even that's not enough, because here's what the Watchtower Society said. And they said this in 2005 when our son was just a few months old. They said, "It may be that the end seems to be a long time in arriving. Sad to say, some Christians who feel this way have allowed their zeal for Jehovah's service to cool off. Those who know Jehovah realize that a last-minute display of zeal will not impress him." So this is why witnesses are always striving to do more. See, my wife and I were worried about our son because we knew at this time that we weren't as zealous as we had been. I mean, we were still faithful witnesses going door to door, and occasionally going door to door and attending all the meetings. We still believed it, but we weren't quite as zealous as we had been before. Because remember when I read earlier the excerpt from my book that talked about what a week in the life of a witness was like, and I said that that was the bare minimum? The thing is, you're supposed to serve Jehovah with your whole strength and your whole soul and your whole mind. You know that scripture that says that, right? And for many years, I figured the way to do that was to be a pioneer. And I'll explain that in a second. But at the time that our son was born, I no longer was a pioneer, so I wasn't doing as much in the religion as I had been before. So I worried that I wouldn't survive, or my wife wouldn't survive, and therefore neither would our son. But here's what a pioneer is. Actually, let me back up, because before I can explain what a pioneer is, I want to just briefly show you the hierarchy of the religion, okay? So in New York City, there's the governing body, which are older men who have had decades of service as Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're appointed for life, essentially. They make all the big decisions. There's like 10 to 20 of them at any given time. And then they have circuit overseers that are traveling ministers that go to the circuits, which is pretty much like 20 congregations in an area. Maybe, I think like Minnesota has like 8 circuits in it, right? And the circuit overseer visits the congregations. He makes recommendations back to the governing body on what that congregation is doing right and wrong. He suggests certain men in the congregation that could be promoted to elders. And then there's the elders. Those are the local witnesses who live in the area, and they're the leaders of their local congregation. They're assisted by ministerial servants who do things maybe like the accounts or handle the sound system. Then there's the other men in the congregation, and then finally there's the women. Now, some of these people are considered full-time servants of Jehovah, or pioneers. And that's really what you need to be. Of course, the governing body and the circuit overseers, they're full-time servants, because it's easy for them to be full-time servants because they get paid to do it. Their housing, their food, their clothes, their cars, plus a monthly stipend is given to them. So it's easy for them to do nothing but the religion. But for everyone else, from elders on down, they have families, they maybe go to school, they almost certainly have a job, right? So I'm going to put a box here. I'm kind of showing the percentage of those people that are what are called publishers. And a publisher is just a typical witness. It means they publish literature to the territory that they live in. Maybe, hopefully every Saturday, hopefully more frequently than that, maybe every Saturday and Sunday, they go door to door. And at the end of the month, when they fill out that slip of paper, they maybe report 15 hours, maybe 20 hours a month, right? But then a small percentage are pioneers. Now, the definition has changed somewhat, but when I was a Jehovah's Witness, being a pioneer meant that you promised to spend 1,000 hours a year knocking on doors and proselytizing. That comes out to about 85 hours a month. And it's not a paid position. In fact, it costs money because you have to pay for your vehicle to drive to the neighborhoods. You have to pay for the literature that you then give to people. If people donate for the literature, I'm supposed to take that money and give it back to the congregation, not pocket it as a reimbursement. So when I was still in junior in high school, I signed up to Pioneer. Most witnesses do have a goal of being a pioneer for like a year or so right after high school. It's a good time to do it, right? But I thought, no, I'm going to do it as quick as I can, and I'm going to do it for the rest of however long this wicked world lasts till Armageddon comes, right? So when I was still a junior in high school, I signed up to Pioneer. And then for the rest of my time in high school, when I was a young adult, even after getting married, I still continued to do the 1,000 hours a month. 1,000 hours a year. There we go. In fact, here's my Pioneer service card that I just thought it would be funny to show you, because the back side is printed on the top left, and it says you're supposed to turn it in when you stop being a pioneer. When I stopped being a pioneer, I hung on to mine. So I think God might be mad at me now. So in fact, I was such a good example as a Jehovah's Witness, so zealous that I was frequently interviewed at their conventions. And once a year they have a convention where all witnesses in the area, in fact, here in Duluth, you guys go to all the way down to Rochester for this yearly convention, and there's witnesses from as far away as Wisconsin, South Dakota, and most of Iowa get together for this yearly convention. So here I am at the St. Paul Civic Center in 1989. I'm the one standing there. There's over 20,000 Jehovah's Witnesses in attendance here, but this elder is interviewing the 4 exemplary youths in the circuit, and I'm one of them. And then here I am at the Mayo Civic Center in 1993. This time an elder is interviewing me and another young girl who evidently are really kicking butt at being Jehovah's Witnesses. And I want to just add one more thing, because I know a few times I've kind of picked on women, and I hope that you know that I'm just picking on how they're perceived in the religion and their role in the religion. Let me just clarify that a little bit, okay? Anything you do as a Jehovah's Witness, they call it a privilege. So getting to clean the Kingdom Hall is a privilege. Going door to door is a privilege. When they have question and answer parts, someone has a microphone and will bring it to people who raise their hand. The young person who's carrying that microphone around, that's called a privilege. They've earned that privilege. So what privileges can men do? What privileges can women do, okay? Well, what about the preaching activity? You guys think just men do that, or just women, or what? Yeah, a little different than Mormons. Both can do it, so we'll put it in the middle column here, right? What about public speaking? Yeah, only men can do that. And what about being an elder? You probably figured that one out already, right? Only men can do that. And then ministerial servants is kind of equivalent to a deacon. I was a ministerial servant for a few years. Yeah, only men can do that. What about doing the accounts? I mean, there you're not being a leader in the congregation, right? I mean, you're just taking the donations, tallying it up, making a deposit in the bank, sending money off to the Watchtower Society. It's really behind the scenes. So that's okay for women to do, right? That's right, only men do that. What about the literature? Someone has to go to the post office and pick up these Watchtower magazines and bring them to the Kingdom Hall and then open up the box and see that they're apportioned. Again, it's not a leadership role. It's something even a woman could handle, I would think, right? No, only men. And then, like I said, the sound system, who's turning up this microphone and turning it down? Who's queuing up the songs when they sing? Yeah, only men do that. What about hall cleaning? You know, when you get to scrub the toilets and everything with a toothbrush? Guess what? Men and women get to do that. So if you're thinking about joining Jehovah's Witnesses and you're a woman, don't do it, because your only privileges as a woman are the absolute shittiest thing that a witness does. Going door to door and getting the door slammed on your face and cleaning the toilets. At least if you're a man, you'll get public speaking experience, or you'll get to do the accounts and learn, sharpen your math skills, or maybe you'll get to be a leader. That stuff might have a certain appeal, but please don't join if you're a woman. So now there are other books that are written by former Jehovah's Witnesses. Mine isn't the only one. And their stories are valid, so I hope nobody thinks that I'm ripping on their stories here, but a lot of them are written by women, and that's a fundamentally different perspective. I'm not going to say that it's easier or harder being a witness as a woman, but it's very different. And a number of them are written by people who joined the religion as adults or maybe as teenagers when their parents did, and many of them never believed it. I can think of one book in particular. The woman was in her teens when her mom joined and made her join. She didn't believe it, and when she turned like 20 years old, she moved out of the house and never did it again, right? So again, that's just very different, because as a person born into a witness family, I'm going to even argue that my brain developed differently, because the anxieties and fears are really played upon in ways that couldn't happen to an adult that joins. In fact, many witnesses and ex-witnesses have issues with depression and anxiety. And then meanwhile, the parts of your brain that are inquisitive and curious are squashed. Maybe squashed is a hard word, but they're kind of put down a little bit. They're not allowed to develop. The ability to think outside the box, to use a cliche, is somewhat suppressed. So I hope this answers a question that you might ask right away, is why was I a Jehovah's Witness then for over 30 years when I was putting the pieces together that so much of it was not right? The answer is easy. It's because my anxiety or my fear was cultivated. My curiosity was stifled. When I was a kid, if I asked a question like, why does sugar dissolve in water? My dad would say, well, because Jehovah made it to do that. Or if we're at the library and I say, hey, Mom, can I check out this book about dinosaurs? Well, I don't know. It has some bad teachings in it. And doing research, as I mentioned earlier, meant just studying the Watchtower publications. In fact, earlier when I read the excerpt from my book and I said we would study for the meetings, here's what that meant. We would read the paragraph in the Watchtower article, and then my dad would ask the question that was pre-printed at the bottom of the page, and then me and my sister and my mom would look for the answer in the paragraph. If there were any cited scriptures, we'd look those up. If there was a word we didn't understand, we would look it up in the dictionary, but that was it. That was the extent of our research. So you're obviously not going to find out that the witnesses are wrong or suspect in anything if that's the extent of your research. Because remember, too, anything contrary is satanic. It's just bait that the devil is using to keep me away from the truth. So I needed to obey the Watchtower Society, even if what it says doesn't make sense. And I'm not exaggerating there, because here's something that they just said 2 months ago. The life-saving direction that we receive from Jehovah's organization may not appear practical from a human standpoint. All of us must be ready to obey any instructions we receive, whether these appear sound from a strategic or human standpoint or not. Now is the time for any who may be putting their trust in secular education, material things, or human institutions to adjust their thinking. The elders stand ready to help any who may now be wavering in their faith. And here's the thing. Let's say that I do ultimately decide to leave the witnesses. I mean, obviously I have already left, but I'm putting myself back in time here. Let's say I'm thinking I need to leave, right? How will I fit in with the world at large? I mean, how will I vote? Like I said, I don't even know what the political parties stand for. I don't know how to determine who to vote for. I've never seen any of my parents or other adults vote. And how do I take my son trick-or-treating? I've never participated in that, as was mentioned earlier. And when my son's birthday party comes around, how do we do that? Do we open the gifts first or cut the cake? I mean, there's all sorts of minutiae. I mean, obviously, none of these things are that big of a deal, but there's thousands of little things like that that you start to wonder about. And here's what's even worse is, let's say I leave the religion and I think maybe I don't even believe in God anymore. Then what? Am I an atheist? So I mean, I know that not everyone here probably self-identifies as an atheist, but I want to show you, here's the magazine cover from their 2010, November 2010 Awake magazine, which was their companion magazine to the Watchtower. And their topic this month was, is atheism on the march? And I want to read you a quote from it, and I want you to see, whether you consider yourself an atheist or not, I want you to see if you can spot any hypocrisy, okay? A new group of atheists has arisen in society. Called the New Atheists, they are not content to keep their views to themselves. Rather, they are on a crusade, actively, angrily, passionately trying to persuade the religious to their point of view. Even agnostics are in their sights, for these new atheists allow no room for doubt. To them, there simply is no God, end of story. So I don't, when I'm a witness, I'm thinking, I don't want to be an atheist. Even worse, look what's on the next page. These new atheists envision a world with no religions, no suicide bombers, no religious wars, and no televangelists fleecing their flocks. Does this vision appeal to you? So you might say, well, if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you leave, that doesn't mean you have to be an atheist. I mean, go be a Lutheran or something, or be Jewish. That's fine. But that's tough to do because the witnesses in their literature do a really good job, and I'm being sincere when I say good here, of pointing out the flaws and hypocrisy and problems with other religions. They even have a book called Mankind's Search for God that breaks down most of the major religions. And after reading the book, with the exception of Buddhism, which they don't really find anything bad to say about, it would be hard to see how you could accept any of those religions. So, but here's even a bigger deal, a bigger thing to worry about than whether or not you believe in God or if you're going to belong to any sort of religion after you leave the witnesses. Here's the biggest problem, is where will I go? Who will be my friends? Because I'm going to be shunned by everyone. Okay, I mean, sure, my coworkers, right, they couldn't care less if I'm a witness or not, and my neighbor, he doesn't care if I'm a witness or even religious, right? So they're not going to shun me, but who the heck are they, right? I mean, as I've said a couple times, I never cultivated any relationship or friendship with them. All the people that I counted as my friends, meanwhile, and this for me included my entire family, they'll shun me. And when I say shunning, I mean immediate and total. Because here's one thing you might wonder is, how do the Jehovah's Witnesses know who to shun, right? Because if a Jehovah's Witness walks in here, they're not gonna be your friends, most of you, but they'll have no problem in conversing with you or treating you like a decent human being. But me, they have to totally shun. So how do they know? So that's easy. They shun people who have broken any of their rules and are not repentant. And it could be the biggest, most serious rule, like maybe you say, I don't believe in God anymore. Well, that's huge, right? So they're gonna kick you out and they'll shun you. Or it could be something real simple like, you know what, you witnesses say we can't smoke? I think it's cool to smoke. I'm gonna have 1 cigarette a year. They'll kick you out still, and they'll still shun you. So whether it's just a tiny little thing, like you're gonna smoke 1 cigarette a year, or a huge thing, like you just don't believe in the Bible or in any sort of deity, either way, they'll kick you out. Here, I'll break it down. When good witnesses go bad. So the first thing is people can get reproved. These people aren't shunned. Let me try and think of an example. Let's say that I'm a Jehovah's Witness and I sleep with someone. I'm not married to that person, right? So I've sinned because I can't have sex outside of marriage. So I confess to the elders, guess what, I sinned. They have a meeting with me, they realize, whoa, I'm really repentant and really remorseful. So I'll get reproved. That means I can't do any of those privileges. Actually, I can still go door to door and I can still clean the Kingdom Hall because even women can do that, right? But I can't do the sound system, I can't raise my hand and comment, I can't give talks. If I was an elder or a pioneer, no more. If I was working at their world headquarters in New York, I have to leave. So, but they don't shun me. I'm still part of the congregation because they realize I made a huge mistake. And maybe it's kind of like paying a fine. You could compare it to that. You know, I'm not thrown in prison. I do have to pay a fine, but you know, you move on and that's fine. The next level, next degree of intensity, I suppose, is getting disfellowshipped. These are people who maybe committed the same sin. Again, it could be a major sin, like I said, or something really minor. The elders meet with them, and the elders decide they're not repentant. And I never was an elder, but I have no idea how they could determine. I mean, unless someone says, I don't care, you guys are full of BS, I'm leaving, right? I mean, I don't know how they could tell if someone was repentant or not, because they would sometimes disfellowship someone, and then at the very next meeting, that person would be there in the audience, looking real sad and remorseful. And they'd sing the songs, they'd look up the scriptures with us. They looked repentant to me. They looked like they still wanted to be part of the religion, but we all were shunning them. And sometimes if they proved themselves over months or years, they would be allowed to come back into the fold and we could talk to them again. One friend of ours, she was disfellowshipped for sleeping with someone she wasn't married to. She actually got pregnant, and she got to enjoy her entire pregnancy with no one speaking to her or talking to her, so I'm sure she appreciated that support. Another thing is that you can disassociate yourself. This is when you write a letter or verbally tell the elders in your congregation, or just write straight to the headquarters and say, I'm done, I don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness anymore. The effect is the same as disassociating. It's just that in one case you were fired, in another case you quit. Either way, they won't talk to you. Here's another thing you can try to do. This isn't an officially sanctioned method for leaving, but you can try to fade. Actually, when people fade, they usually don't do it conscientiously. Let's see, my in-laws did this, and my sister. They moved from city to city, at least my sister did, or they just started reducing their activity because they were discouraged or they were depressed or they had other issues in life. Before you know it, they just didn't have the zeal to go door to door. Then they were showing up at just maybe like one meeting a month. They weren't bothering to go down to Rochester every year because that's a hassle to rent a hotel and drive all the way there. And before you know it, they just weren't doing it anymore. And because they didn't see the witnesses at their congregation, they started befriending their coworkers, because they wanted to fill the void socially somehow. And so maybe after years, they realized they don't even believe it anymore. It just kind of snuck up on them. So that's something that people do. But if you faded, most witnesses will still shun you because they'll think you must have done something wrong for not being in the religion. And I just want to point out that my wife and I did none of the above. We were not disfellowshipped. We didn't write a letter saying we no longer wanted to be Jehovah's Witnesses, and we didn't reduce our activity over the course of years. If you want to find out what we did, how we left, and what it was that we majorly disagreed about, then you can read my book. So that's all that I have for you.